sudden destruction of the moon forces the human race into a desperate gambit for survival in Earth's orbit in Seveneves. That's the book I'm reviewing on this episode of SFF180. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you're having a very lovely day. Thomas here, as always. Now, it might seem unusual for a man who has been so critical of science fiction's recent lack of optimistic future visions to have gone all out with an end-of-the-world epic. What is even more unusual is that, in spite of its apocalyptic story, Seveneves still manages to be an optimistic future vision. You want unusual? Welcome to Neal Stephenson. Taking thematic cues from present-day anxieties about eco-disaster and the world's decreasing overall sustainability, Neal Stephenson delivers the big idea hard SF magnum opus that the genre has been pining for. It's a disaster novel to end all disaster novels, and even though it foregrounds the sad reality that there are some men and women who just want to watch the world burn, it also makes the point that as a species we have enough grit and determination to bounce back from literally anything if we set our minds to it, even if it's a task as daunting as rebooting the entire human race from a surviving population of only 7 women. Getting right down to business, Seveneves blows up the moon in its very first sentence, and then spends about the next 2/3 of its 850-plus pages detailing a relatable near future in which the human race has only 2 short years to prepare for the hard rain, when the shattered pieces of our fallen satellite will crash down upon the planet, bringing death and destruction upon us all, burning the very skies. With the surface of the Earth uninhabitable for millennia, our only hope seems to rest in orbit, where a few thousand survivors and a massive archive of human embryos might just manage to ride out the catastrophe in habitats linked to the ISS, which here in the book is an expanded version of its current self, with a gigantic asteroid bolted onto one end. The world's nations scramble to send representatives to live up aboard the Cloud Ark, a collection of small orbital habitats that they can dock to one another, but they can also, and this is the idea anyway, split up and maneuver out of the path of any descending chunks of moon, therefore presumably solving the problem of the entire remaining human race being wiped out if they're all in a single habitat that happens to get hit. For about 300 pages, Stephenson ruthlessly weeds out readers who simply don't have the stomach for the hardest of hard science fiction and devotes reams of text to technical minutiae of orbital survival, detailing exactly what must be accomplished and how daunting a task it all is. It's similar in a way to the way Andy Weir went about the process of helping Mark Watney survive aboard the surface of Mars all alone in The Martian. Yeah, it's a lot of techie detail, but these passages not only illustrate that Stephenson has absolutely done his homework, but they enhance dramatic tension by reminding us, driving home the enormity of exactly what the characters in the story have to accomplish and how short a time frame they have to accomplish it in. There's a lot these survivors are going to have to endure, and enduring it will be no easy task. Once the 2-year grace period has passed and the global bombardment has begun, Stephenson shifts into some of the most riveting dramatic storytelling of his entire career. In addition to the threat from above, we are reminded, none too harshly, that even with complete species extinction at stake, there will be people who prioritize their own personal ambitions and political goals over the good of all, mostly through the sheer narcissism of equating what's best for them personally with what's best for everyone. Stephenson spares us the pathos and the melodrama that a lesser writer might bring to a story about human extinction, and thus he makes his story more powerful with an approach that, while it doesn't lack for humanity or compassion, still is unsentimental and just plain brutally honest. The consequences of all of this human drama prove to be almost as catastrophic as the destruction of the moon itself. And after about 550 pages, the novel's midsection climaxes with the entire human race being reduced to a population of only 8 women, one of them postmenopausal. And by the way, that's not a spoiler. All of the book's marketing and summary and blurbs have focused on this particular aspect of the story. This section of the book is some of the most harrowing storytelling science fiction has seen in nearly a generation. And if Seveneves had ended there, it would have been as close to perfect as a book could be. But it doesn't. Stephenson goes on for about another 300 pages in a sequence that shoots us 5,000 years into the future. The descendants of these Seveneves, the surviving women of the Cloud Ark experience, who went on to bear generations of children following epigenetic experimentation, now number roughly 3 billion people, living in an orbital ring of O'Neill habitats. Meanwhile, the Earth's surface has, for many, many years, been undergoing a steady but very slow process of re-terraforming and recolonization. The most interesting idea Stephenson explores in these passages involves the way in which not only 7 distinct races have descended from each of the Eves, but how their political divisions line up with the personal antagonisms that the individual Eves all had for one another. The habitat ring, constructed from leftover bits of the moon, is an absolute technological marvel. But it's also got its own equivalent of the Berlin Wall, with the red population, those descended from 2 of the women who were essentially the early story's villains, separating themselves physically from the blues. This section of the book is no less intellectually fascinating than what came before, but dramatically it's less powerful. We don't quite have the same degree of investment in the characters, mainly because, I'd suggest, they aren't suffering the same intense degree of calamity suffered by the Eves. Still, Stephenson makes their cultural differences and their practices very believable, and whatever this section of the novel lacks in epic dramatic sweep, I think it makes up for in being very, very generous with that brand of dry, droll humor that longtime Neal Stephenson fans will be well familiar with. What I got the biggest kick out of, and which was most unexpected to me, was how in this section of the book, Stephenson pays homage to, of all things, epic fantasy tropes. As the storyline here deals with a discovery on the Earth's surface that is so momentous it requires the formation of a Seven, a group consisting of at least 1 member of each of the ring races, in order to investigate it. You know, kind of like these guys. Stephenson even has everybody meet up in a tavern, which I'm reliably informed is the opening to pretty much every D&D campaign in the history of ever. While there's much to admire and enjoy in these chapters, part of me still wishes that Stephenson had reserved them for their own sequel. As it stands, they kind of feel like a tacked-on narrative coda, without the intensity and the profound sense of consequence that informed the entire Cloud Arc sequence of the book. And, as Stevenson's longtime readers will again be aware of, he has occasionally this odd habit of ending his novels in a way that feels like he got up to get himself a cup of coffee and forgot to sit back down again. And Seveneves is no different, ending literally smack dab in the middle of a conversation that was just starting to get interesting. But it's a testament to just how much of the book Neal Stephenson gets right that these niggling little flaws don't do more damage to the whole. Featuring some of the most direct and accessible storytelling of his entire career, and featuring visions and ideas that simply explode, yes, pun intended, with a real sense of awe and ingenuity, Seveneves is poised not only to be the major science fiction novel of this year, but a much discussed and revisited classic in times to come. And that is all I have time for on this episode of SFF180. Remember, the most important thing, these are reviews. You will not always agree with me, but if you enjoyed watching, please leave a like, share this video far and wide with your SFF reading friends. Please subscribe to the channel. That is how SFF180 grows. Also, I've never really mentioned this before, but if you use my Amazon links, well, they give me a little gift certificate, which I kind of like. So, once again, as always, thank you all so much for joining me, and until I see you next time, happy reading.